Good afternoon, I'm Thomas Shaw. Welcome to the latest in our Lenten series, Catechism of the Orthodox Faith according to the Old Testament. We can't go over every prophet, especially a lot of the minor ones during the time we have, so we're going to not talk about some of the earlier band of prophets, such as the counterpart to Amos, Hosea, who's an Israelite from the north who also delivers a prophecy against the northern kingdom. Instead, and there's some other prophets who are kind of undateable that some people want to put in this period. But the main prophet of this period in the 8th century is Isaiah, and his prophetic career appears to begin not long after Amos is left off. But in order to understand Isaiah, we have to understand what's happening in the background, because Isaiah is what we might call a court prophet. He is an advisor to various kings, and he offers the word of the Lord, puts that into the mix and of course, there are purely people with purely political considerations also have the ear of the king. So the kings don't always follow the advice of such a prophet. Now, the background in the last half of the 8th century is that Assyria is on the march. A new king, Tiglath-Pileser III, comes to the throne, and he greatly he puts Assyria even on more of a war footing than it had been, and really starts to enlarge the borders of Assyria, which already encompass all the area of northern Iraq in today's geography. And he and his successors bring Babylon under. They go up into the mountains and bring Urartu under the control of Assyria. They go east into Persia, but they're also moving west in their various campaigns, and they begin to put pressure onto Aram, which is today we would call Syria, and the northern kingdom of Israel, who enter into an alliance. And while at the same time, Jerusalem has become an Assyrian ally. And it's because Jerusalem's an Assyrian ally that it ultimately survives just barely. And we see that Isaiah is very much in favor of this alliance when under Hezekiah, who's known as a reforming king and even the subject of prophecies that are later ultimately ascribed to Christ, he being a Messiah himself, being the anointed king of Judah, that he wants to break free of the Assyrian hold on Jerusalem, and there's as Assyria is on the march, and when of course they withdraw, because Assyria wasn't like Persia, it didn't set up the kinds of administrative centers and so forth to bring lands it captured under its control. Instead, it just went in and stole everything, devastated the land, and then people could kind of pick up and like, well, are they coming back? We need to get strong. And for instance, Hezekiah, in anticipation of a potential siege of Jerusalem, strengthens the ancient conduit that brought water into the city, and he builds another wall and so forth. So there's a lot of preparation going on. One then is The Philistines are trying to get allies, similar to the alliance of Aram and Israel that's ultimately destroyed, and Israel is taken into captivity, and other people are planted there. Same thing happens to the Philistines. He's trying to make an alliance with Egypt. And Isaiah is opposed to this. Isaiah follows a very similar political line that we find nearly a century later with, or maybe a little more than a century later with Jeremiah. Because Jeremiah also is advising as the king at the time to make an alliance with Babylon, because Babylon's going to come and destroy Jerusalem. And of course, they ultimately do and take the people in Judah, or some of them, off into captivity. So the same fate awaits the southern kingdom that befell the older kingdom more than a century earlier. And the prophets see that the only way to avoid this is to be friendly to the ones who are coming to overtake them. So Isaiah is in favor of a pro-Assyrian policy. And he's the advisor, he's alive under the kings Uzziah. Now, Uzziah was a king who was actually deprived of his kingship or shut up in the palace because he attempted to do something that the priests at the time thought was improper. What this was exactly isn't really clear, since the only all we have is the verb to burn, which is translated in our Bibles to burn incense, that he was going to go burn incense. What does this mean? That he was going to try to do the atonement? Had it been in fact, the practice of the kings to do the atonement, to go into the Holy of Holies, and that this marks some kind of a change, a resistance to the kings having any kind of role in the temple at all, than to just be one of the people. Something has gone on here, though, that and because of his impiety, it's said in the scriptures, he contracts leprosy. Leprosy being a term for maybe leprosy or maybe something else, some skin disease. But he's shut up in his palaces. So that, and his son Jotham reigns in his stead while he's still king. And there's a lot of these overlapping reigns in Judah. His son of it is Ahaz, and then Ahaz's son is Hezekiah. So during the last half of the 8th century, then these four kings follow one another, and Isaiah is there in the court advising them. And so that's the general background, and there's a lot more detail could be got into, but it's not necessary for this review. Now, as far as the structure of the book of Isaiah, it has over 60 chapters. It's a long book. But scholars for over a century have believed that parts of the book were written after the time of Isaiah, and that even the parts that were written during the time of Isaiah have had little notes, little additions, clarifications put in them. Of course, this is challenged by other scholars who some find the book has 2 parts, some have different theories, but it does seem to be the case that when you read it carefully, that there are little things that stick out here and there that seem to come from the time of the exile or the return from exile from Babylon over a century later. Now, the fact that, we as Orthodox, in my opinion, don't have to defend the viewpoint that Isaiah wrote every word in text, because we know, for instance, from the book of Jeremiah, where the Septuagint version is quite a bit different than the finalized Hebrew version, that some of these larger books of prophecy, such as Isaiah and Jeremiah, were added to and developed as time went on by we don't know who. It's said to be disciples of the prophet. There was a school of Isaiah. The school of Isaiah kept the scroll and added to it as time went on. We have no information to confirm or deny this other than looking at the text carefully ourselves and coming to our own opinion. But in any event, Isaiah goes, the first 39 chapters, the last three of which are more or less telling the story of the siege of Jerusalem exactly as it's told in the book of Kings, which we also have reason to believe was written after the exile or during it. This little historical section seems to mark the Isaiah's prophecies proper from those that came after, according to those who hold this opinion. So I'm using this as a break. And if you read the first 39 chapters, you can see he starts off like Amos. And it isn't really that specific about what's going to happen, but that bad things are on the way. And then as time goes on, he's obviously following in Amos's tradition. They're much lengthier. Amos has various prophecies against various nations around about Judah and Israel, and Isaiah has much longer ones, and so forth. So a lot of the same themes we saw on Amos we'll see coming up, and many passages from Isaiah are quoted in services of the church, particularly the Nativity. And so some of those, I've selected some little passages to read here, and I'm not sure how far along we're going to get today, because some of these can go on, but I wanted to share some of the highlights from the first part of Isaiah in the first 39 chapters. Then we'll go on and look at the remainder of the book, which has some of the greatest sections of Hebrew poetry in them, as his own poems are reworked by later writers, or we don't really know. You'd have to be an expert to really have an opinion. So first in chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, we have this: the word that came from the Lord to Isaiah, the son of Amos, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So here we have a prophecy. Now it shall come to pass in the last days. So here we're on the theme of the end of time, the day of the Lord. It shall come to pass in the last days, the mountain of the Lord and the house of God shall be visible on the tops of the mountains and exalted above the hills. All the Gentiles shall come to it. So this is a theme that becomes very important in the prophets, which is that in the run up to the end, the Gentiles will come to worship the Lord. Many Gentiles shall travel and say, come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will proclaim his way to us, and we shall walk in it. For the law of the Lord shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord. Remember, we talked about the word of the Lord being a hypostasis of God in the prophets, and we're starting to see this a little bit here. So the law of the Lord shall go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And of course, the fathers would interpret this passage to be referring to Christ. So this is a little bit from the another one from the opening chapters before he receives what's called the commission of Isaiah. This is in the early days of his prophecy. He's following more in the line of Amos. So in 5:18 to 23, we hear this. Woe! This reminds us of Jesus and his woes. And woe to those who draw sins themselves as with a long rope and lawlessness as with the strap of a cow's yoke, who say, let him speedily hasten what he will do that we may see it. In other words, they're doubters. They're saying, well, let's see what you got. Let's see God do something. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel come that we may know it. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are intelligent in their own eyes and expert in their own sight. Woe to your strong ones who drink wine, and the mighty ones who mix intoxicating drink, who justify the ungodly for a bribe and take away justice from the righteous man. So we get themes of injustice, of impudence, of arrogance, very much similar, very similar in the opening of Isaiah to what we find in Amos. And then we have the commission of Isaiah, even though he's been prophesying lately. I mean, before this, he began. In chapter 6 we have this passage, so comprising most of the chapter. And the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. The house was full of his glory, the house being the temple. So the temple's full of his glory. He's the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. So we're having a real kind of temple theophany here. Around him stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. This is, of course, Lord of hosts is Lord Sabaoth. This is a hymn we sing in the church to this day in the Anaphora, the Divine Liturgy. The lintel was lifted up by the voice of those who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. So we have many of the elements of the theophany that we see on Sinai now happening in the temple with Isaiah. So Isaiah's response to this vision is, so I said, woe is me, because I am pierced to the heart. For being a man and having unclean lips, I will dwell in the midst of a people with unclean lips. For I saw the King, the Lord of hosts, with my eyes. Then one of the seraphim was sent to me. He had a live coal in his hand, which he took with tongs from the altar. So it's referring to the altar of incense. So he's right outside the holiest place, in the area where the candle stand and the showbread are. He touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your lawlessness is taken away and your sin is cleansed. So we have a prefigurement here of Holy Communion. I also heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? Who will go to this people? Then I said, behold, here am I, send me. So the prophet responds to the Lord's request for volunteers with eagerness. So he said, go and tell this people, you shall hear indeed, but not understand. And you shall see indeed, but not perceive. Now this is an idea that Jesus hammers on. And what is the idea? That in order to hear the word of the Lord, your heart has to be open to hear the word of the Lord. And if your heart isn't open to hear the word of the Lord, you're like a deaf man, you're like a blind man. You can't see, you can't hear. For the heart of this people has become insensitive, and their ears hear with difficulty. They have closed their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return. Return being signifying here, repent. And I should heal them. So if they return, the Lord will heal them. But in order to return, they have to hear first. That's why Jesus is always saying, let those with ears hear what I have to say. If you don't have ears to begin with, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Then I said, Lord, how long? So he answered, until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, the houses are without people, and the land shall be desolate. After this, God will remove the people far away, and those left in the land shall multiply. So this is in the year King Uzziah died. It was about 740. So this is before Israel has been taken away. All these things are going to happen, and ultimately the Assyrians are going to lay siege to Jerusalem, having rampaged through the rest of Judah and destroyed the cities in the rest of Judah, and only Jerusalem remains, and it only survives due to the Lord sending a plague, and Hezekiah evidently selling everything or giving all the treasures that he could find in the city, stripping the temple of all of its gold, brass, silver, and everything, and using it as tribute. So this takes us to the calling of Isaiah. I think it's a good place to let off for today. Tomorrow we'll continue in what's called First Isaiah. These things are called sometimes Proto, Deutero, and Trito Isaiah. I'm just going to call them first, second, and third if it's necessary to bring them up. Tomorrow we'll finish looking at first part of Isaiah through chapter 39 and then continue on from there. Hope you're having a blessed Lent. Thank you.